Hello, damsels and knights. I'm Sam Godwin, and welcome to the third episode of The Late History Show. The Late Show where we talk about history with the ones who made it. In the last two episodes, we had the honor of having the founders of the Holy Roman Empire, Charlemagne and Otto the Great. Tonight, we continue with another historical figure who is the founder of Norman England. Damsels and knights, a big applause for Guillaume le Conqueror, William the Conqueror.
Bonjour, mon ami. It's a pleasure to be here.
Thanks for accepting our invitation. For those who do not know, Guillaume is not new to the channel. He took part in the video where me and Alexandros the Great ranked all the historical figures that were called the Conqueror. If you want to know who won, check out the video on our channel. Back to you. How should I call you? William or Guillaume?
Guillaume. Everyone called me like that, except those Anglo-Saxon peasants who spoke in that barbaric language.
We will talk about England later. First, I want to focus more on the times before 1066. Everyone knows you just for the events of Hastings, but your early years as Duke of Normandy are just as interesting as your reign as King of England.
I agree. My younger years were a literal roller coaster. There were some moments when I thought I would die, more than during any battle.
But let's don't pretend that everyone knows who you are. Would you give us a little introduction?
Sure. I was the greatest Duke of Normandy. I ruled it from 1035 to 1087, and from 1066 I was also King of England. With me, Anglo-Saxon Britain came to an end and Norman England was born, introducing the Norman culture that would shape England's future for centuries to come.
Thanks. Now let's start with your early years as a duke. You inherited the title from your father Robert the Magnificent after he died in Nicaea in 1035. You were just a child. What were those times like?
An educational nightmare. Let me explain. Those were very hard times. I had many nobles who didn't like me and wanted me dead. Many of my tutors died while protecting me. I spent my teenage years running from castle to castle. It was a nightmare. I don't even know how I survived. But God was on my side, and finally I became old enough to rule on my own, and I was ready to take my revenge. Thanks to that experience, I understood that I would have to work hard to claim my power and keep it. Life went hard on me, and I had to be tough as a person and as a leader, on the battlefield and in diplomacy.
We can resume the next decades of your life with the story of one man, King Henry I of France.
Ah, that traitorous bastard. He supported me in my war to assert my power over Normandy against many rebellious nobles, who weren't very keen on being ruled by me. For a decade, the Duchy of Normandy was in a state of anarchy, but the party was over. In 1047, my control over Normandy was secured with a decisive victory at the Battle of Valley-les-Dunes, where my Norman army and the King's army defeated the rebels. By the end of the decade, I was finally Duke of Normandy with no major opposition. But peace was still far away. As so often in history, when you gain too much power and influence, your former allies begin to fear you and try to stop your rise. Year by year, I grew stronger and more powerful. King Henry betrayed me by forming an alliance with my enemy, the Count of Anjou, Geoffrey Martel, and some Norman nobles. They all feared my growing dominance and thought that together they could stop me. They were wrong. As a teenager, I had to run away from my enemies. This time I will face them like a grown man, ready to fight for his land and his people. In February 1054, the king and the Norman rebels launched a double invasion of my duchy. Henry led the main army through the county of Evreux, while the others invaded eastern Normandy. Both armies were defeated by my Norman knights. But my enemies weren't ready to give up, and I was ready for the second round. In 1057, King Henry and Geoffrey invaded Normandy once again. I marched my army to meet them on the battlefield for one last decisive battle, the Battle of Varaville, where I defeated them once and for all. For the rest of my life, Normandy was never invaded again. Finally, my land was secure and it was my time to launch an invasion.
What a story. In a span of 20 years, you went from running away from nobles who were trying to kill you to defeating the King of France on the battlefield.
And the best is still to come. In 1060, an important news reached my court. Both King Henry and Geoffrey of Anjou had died. It was time to make my move. In 1062, I invaded the county of Maine, a buffer state between my duchy and the county of Anjou. By 1064, This strategic piece of land was mine. I can say without a doubt that I was the most powerful man in France at that time. But my influence and power were destined to reach beyond the borders of France, across the English Channel.
It is time to talk about 1066, the year that made England.
It's January 1066. The King of England, Edward III the Confessor, died without a legitimate son. Previously he had promised to make me his heir and future King of England, since we were related. But something went wrong on his deathbed. A powerful nobleman named Harold Godwinson claimed to the Anglo-Saxon aristocracy that Edward had chosen him as his successor, and he crowned himself King of England. I was furious. I had to fight again to claim my rightful throne. I immediately gave orders to organize an expeditionary army, and by summer we were ready to sail for the shores of England. But someone stopped me.
Who?
The freaking weather. The wind was so strong in the English Channel that we couldn't sail without risking our ships. Harold too was waiting for me, but in September he returned to London, just in time to receive a terrible news. Harald Hardrada, the King of Norway, was invading Northumbria.
Wait, this part of the story will be told by a special guest, Harald Hardrada himself.
Skål to all, I'm Harald Hardrada, King of Norway, member of the Varangian Guard and military captain of the Kievan Rus. In 1066 the news of Edward's death and the subsequent Harold and Guillaume's race for the throne. My advisors remembered me that the previous King of Norway Magnus and the previous King of England Hardenat had made an interesting agreement. Whoever died first would inherit the other's kingdom. Obviously, this claim to the English throne was weaker in respect to the others, but I didn't care. The war with Denmark was going nowhere, so I thought. Yeah, let's raid England again, like in the good old days of the Viking invasions. Also the remote possibility of becoming king was intriguing. So, we made an alliance with Tostig Godwinson, former Earl of Northumbria and brother of King Harold, who seeks some glory with my help in England. I sailed from Norway with an army of 12,000 men, loaded on 270 longships, ready to fight. In September we arrived in Northumbria, where we raided the village of Scarborough. News of our raids reached the Earls of Northumbria and Mercia, who tried to stop us in the Battle of Fulford. We defeated them and this victory led to the conquest of York on September 24. This was the last time a Scandinavian army defeated an English army. We were ready to feast and plan the next move, but we couldn't. The very next day, the Anglo-Saxon army led by Harold arrived and took us by surprise. I still can't believe how he moved his army so quickly. We were so unprepared that many of my men, including myself, didn't have time to put on our armor. We weren't ready to fight, but we had no choice. The Battle of Stamford Bridge began. We fought bravely, but it wasn't enough. Our army was completely wiped out, including myself. I fought till the end like a true warrior king. Of the 270 ships that left Norway, only 20 returned home. My story was over, just like the Viking Age, but Harold had one more battle to fight.
Thanks for the contribution, Harold. Hope to see you in a future episode. Your story is worth to tell and to discover. Back to us. Harold had just ended the Viking Age with the Battle of Stamford Bridge when he received the news of your landing in southern England. With an outstanding speed, he traveled back south to meet you. This decisive battle for the future of England took place on a hill near Hastings on the 14th of October.
We can resume the battle in this terms. Harold's army consisted mostly of foot soldiers forming a shield wall, and my army was mostly mounted Norman knights. The Anglo-Saxons resisted all the attacks of my Norman cavalry all day long. The battle was very close and difficult. I gave many different orders to my men. Harold, on the other hand, had a simple strategy, with one simple order: shield wall and resist. And it worked. But then God decided to help the rightful king, and the combination of two factors turned the tide of the battle. After another failed cavalry attack, my knight retreated and the Anglo-Saxons broke their formation and started chasing my men. This happened sometimes during the battle, where normally Harold gave the order to his men to go back in formation, but this time he couldn't give any order. An arrow hit him in the eye and killed him on the battlefield. Without a leader to stop them, the troops broke formation and chased my Norman cavalry. I realized this was the moment for the decisive move. I rallied my troops and ordered a final charge, and this time the Anglo-Saxon shield wall couldn't stop our horses and victory was finally mine. After the battle I marched to reach London, and on Christmas Day I was crowned King of England. 1066 was over. Anglo-Saxon England and the Viking Age were also over. But the English and Norman connection was just starting.
There are some topics I want to discuss about your time as king, like your love for building castles.
Let's give some context to our public. During my rule I built a lot of castles all over England. Like the famous Tower of London. Actually, I can be credited for the introduction of castles in England. Obviously, these types of fortifications were very simple in comparison to those of the future. Ever since the first revolts of the Anglo-Saxon nobles, I realized that I needed to maintain more control over my domains, and castles could be used for this and many other military operations.
Speaking of revolts, when looking at your reign as King of England, it seems natural for me to ask you a question. Was it worth it? Let me explain what I mean. Many people just think that you ruled England after 1066 with just a few rebellions to put down, and that was it. In reality, the world was against you. Some powerful Anglo-Saxon nobles continued to revolt throughout most of your reign, all over England, and they allied themselves with the various enemies that you encountered over the years. The King of Scotland, Malcolm III, invaded the north, and the freaking King of Denmark invaded England. Twice. Once in Northumbria, and once in East Anglia. In addition, problems continued on the continent as the King of France, Philip I, and other French nobles attempted to undermine your control of the County of Maine, forcing you to travel back and forth between Normandy and England. As well as your external enemies, you also had problems within your own family, like your son Robert Courthouse, one of the future leaders of the First Crusade. You and him argued a lot, and he even revolted against you. You overcame most of these problems, but where did you find the force to go on for all those years?
Well, let's just say it wasn't easy. Especially in the early years, when England was full of rebellions and Danish raids. But since I always had to fight to impose my control and maintain it since the start of my life, I was quite used to it. And I also knew that God was on my side, and this gave me more confidence in my battles.
But unlike Normandy, this fight never ended.
The instinct to fight was in my blood, but I must say that in the last years of my reign, the constant problems both in Normandy and in England became more and more difficult for my body and soul to fight with the same energy as in my younger years. Especially since 1083, when my beloved wife Matilda of Flanders died. But I continued to fight until my death in 1087, during a siege in northern France. If we only look at this side of the story, we can assume that the conquest of England caused me a lot of problems. But I also made some decisions and actions that lasted after me and had consequences that brought me fame and eternal glory. This is a great reward for all my work and especially for all the people who died trying to protect me when I was a child. So, yes, it was worth it.
Speaking of actions that lasted for centuries, I want to end this episode by talking about the cultural change that you started, beside building castles all over England.
What I did was simply understand that the Anglo-Saxon aristocracy and clergy were not trustworthy. I also wanted to bring in the Norman style of government as opposed to a Danish Anglo-Saxon one. So I gave land and titles to more and more Norman nobles. By doing this, I reduced the Anglo-Saxon aristocracy and I introduced in England the feudal system. Also, the local clergy were replaced by Norman bishops and priests.
What you didn't expect was the change in language that you caused. Basically, you and your nobles only spoke French, while the peasants spoke Anglo-Saxon, and over time the two languages somehow mixed together, creating a vocabulary that is still used in modern English.
Yeah, this funny fact that for centuries after me, the English kings spoke French is often forgotten. But, come on, French was a noble and elegant language, while that Anglo-Saxon was a nearly barbaric language, spoke by those poor peasants.
And with this statement, we arrived at the end of this episode. Thanks for your time, Guillaume.
It was a pleasure, especially because I was able to speak about my early years as Duke, which are often overlooked by the media.
And thanks for your time, damsels and knights. If you enjoyed the content, don't forget to subscribe, and see you in the next video.